Welcome, brothers, sisters, fellow travelers. My name is Joel and this is Good Crazy. I'd like to talk a little bit about my background. I've mentioned previously how I was raised as Jehovah's Witness, but I haven't gone into it in any more detail. And it's an important part of my life. Even if it's in the past, it was about 30 years of my life. And I wasn't just, on the fringes of that religion. I was really involved in it, and I believed it wholeheartedly. Something outsiders may not know about Jehovah's Witnesses is that when one Jehovah's Witness meets another Jehovah's Witness for the first time, they don't say, typically, when did you become a Jehovah's Witness? That would sound, I feel like, a little foreign. Because what is more common is to say, when did you learn the truth? Because amongst themselves, Jehovah's Witnesses refer to their religion simply as the truth. It's just the truth. They'll say, in response to that question, well, I was raised in the truth, or I was born in the truth, because they're referring to the religion, not to truth itself, obviously. But that's how they view it. They learned the truth. And that is what I believed. I really believed that I was incredibly blessed to have been born to parents who already knew the truth, right? And I felt that I was part of God's people. And I realize, looking back, that I would never have realized otherwise had I not ended up on the outside of the religion. Because Jehovah's Witnesses practice a form of shunning or excommunication, where if a person gets in trouble, they commit a sin, and they are deemed to be unrepentant, they can be removed, they can be shunned by the community. Things have changed since I left, so it's not exactly that way anymore, but at that time, even your own parents, your family, your friends would cease to talk to you. And it's not meant to be forever, right? The idea is to discipline the person with the goal of them returning to the organization, to the religion. But you can imagine what a harsh experience that can be, because all the people that I had known up to that point, that I had been close with, all the family that I was close with, all the friends that I had, were suddenly gone. So all the love that I had been receiving was just gone. But the beauty of that is all of the pressure, all of the influence that other people had over me was gone for the first time. And it's maybe hard to believe, maybe easy to believe, but without that influence in my life, I could finally think freely for myself. And it didn't happen overnight. I didn't suddenly just change my beliefs because, well, I realized something about myself in that experience, something profoundly moving that changed me forever, which is when I realized that some of the things I had been taught weren't true. Well, that was shocking, obviously. When you believe something is true for your whole life and then find out it wasn't true, that can be shocking. But even more shocking was that this information wasn't hidden from me, right? It wasn't behind a paywall. It wasn't locked up in some vault. It was freely and readily available to me, but I didn't see it. Or I saw it, but didn't really see it, if that makes sense. And I realized why that was. And it was because I didn't want to see it. Now, I thought that I wanted to see it. That's the other shocking part, is I thought that I was open-minded. I thought I wanted to see the truth, that I was willing to change my beliefs, but I really wasn't. And that makes sense because my whole world was tied up in that religion. My family, my friends, even work that I had received was through other people in the congregation. So there was just everything about my life was wrapped up in that religion. So it really didn't benefit me in the short term to end up on the outside. It was actually a very difficult, trying experience. So part of me was looking out for me in a very simple way, right? Not wanting me to end up in a terrible situation. Now, given plenty of time, now I'm so grateful that that happened to me. I needed that to happen, but at the time it was very difficult. In realizing that fact about myself, that because I didn't want to see it, I didn't, made me really examine who I am and see something I think that is true about all people, which is that when we don't want to see something, or when we want to see something, it influences what we believe. We like to think often, I think, there's that classic dichotomy, left brain and right brain. The left brain is logical, the right brain is emotional. Well, they've shown that's actually not true. There are distinct differences, but it's far more nuanced than that. And the reality is, it is impossible to separate our reason from our emotions, what we want or do not want to believe. And this is known. I mean, when you look at scientific studies, the best that there are, they try to remove bias always because they know how it influences the results. So they'll have a randomized, double blind control study, like a placebo control of some sort. Why? Because they know that if the researchers and participants know whether they're, say, receiving a treatment or not, it directly influences the results. And bias is always present otherwise. So what do? Oftentimes we're always doing experiments on ourselves, in everyday life that aren't scientific, right? Where someone has a cold and they say, hey, here's some homeopathic medicine. And the person tries it, they feel better, and they say to themselves, well, I guess homeopathic medicine works. So if we recognize that bias will influence what we believe and we want to remove that bias, there are ways to do that through scientific studies, but most of the time there are things in life that really can't be studied in that way. Things we test on ourselves, we can't necessarily remove bias completely. And I realize this about myself. And I'm a human being. At the end of the day, I have wants and I have things that I don't want, and I can't get rid of that. So what do? Do I just give up on trying to come to, better conclusions? Do I just accept my fate? I would say that the answer isn't to remove bias. It is to embrace our biases. Not that we accept all biases, but that we examine them. We realize that we have them and we look within. That's a huge part of, like, the classic saying, know thyself, right? From the Oracle of Delphi. That is a huge part of human growth, is to look at ourselves and to say, where are my biases and why do I feel that way? And look at them more deeply and then change them if possible when we say, well, I don't actually want to feel that way anymore. Because for me, as soon as I said in my heart, I don't want to believe this, something shifted where all of a sudden the information was there. Some of the information was just in the encyclopedia, but I hadn't really looked for it because I hadn't wanted to see it. But now I wanted to see that, and it suddenly became available. So our bias can always influence what we believe, which means it's always possible to be wrong. So the question isn't, what's the right way to do things? The question is, if every way is wrong that I'm familiar with, everything I know could be wrong, then of all the wrong ways there are to be, what's the way that I would choose? Because when I realized that I was wrong about those things, I felt a certain, embarrassment to have been wrong for so long. But that's okay. Embarrassment fades because everyone does things that are embarrassing from one time or another. But the things that hurt me had nothing to do with being embarrassed for being wrong, for potentially being stupid or whatever else. It was the people that I had hurt because I believed that I was right. When I was so self-righteous about what I believed, and I treated people meanly in a cruel way because they didn't do things the way I thought were right. I look back on that with shame, and I realized that our reason shouldn't be our guide. Our reason is incredibly helpful and we should absolutely use it. But our guide in life is our conscience. Remember, Jesus said the kingdom of God, right, is inside you. And that's what we have to appreciate. God has endowed us with this beautiful thing that tells us when we're doing something wrong. And our reason can override it. We'll say, well, I know that I should mistreat them because, they're doing something bad. but our conscience may be pinging us, like, ooh, it doesn't feel right. And we can override it. But the opposite should be the case, that even if our reason tells us something is true, but our conscience says, that doesn't feel right, we should listen to our conscience. Because at the end of the day, I, for myself, would say that I would rather be living in line with my conscience than be right about everything. I would rather, in the end, be completely wrong about everything I believed, but look back on a life where I treated everyone with kindness and compassion. I would be proud to have lived a life like that. And so for me, I looked at everything that there is to believe, and I was finally free to examine everything. And that's what I hope for everyone, really. I don't care what you choose to believe. You don't have to believe what I believe at all. But I hope that you could be free to not let anyone influence, not your parents, not your family, not your community, not your religious leader. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily wrong, but let what you believe be what you truly and authentically believe. Because for once in my life, I was free to examine everything, all the philosophy, all the religion, all the science. Nothing was off the table. Before, plenty of things had been off the table. I thought that I was seeing them all, but I wasn't truly seeing them. And we live in the greatest age in human history where knowledge is readily and easily available. So anything that you want to study is available to you. And I'll just touch briefly on the last key to my transformation, which is that I looked at everything that there is to believe. And truly, I didn't want to hold on to anything that I had believed. I was willing to go in a completely different direction. But I chose to look at everything, even the things that were part of my original belief system. And out of all those things, I thought, if every path is potentially wrong, what's the one thing or what's something that I would want to believe, even if it were wrong? And that for me is the story of Jesus. Because, on its face, whether you believe it or not, it's a story of a superhero, right? Someone who's supposed to be the son of God, which is a typical, like, that's the old world story of a superhero. Of course, it's the son of God who is endowed with miraculous powers, not so he can fly around or have lasers shoot out of his eyes, but so he can heal people, so he could change the world for the better, right? He has all these people who are hurting, and he uses his power to heal them. And he sets an example of self-sacrificial love, putting other people first. Supposedly the story of someone, right, who doesn't have to even be here, but is here because he puts other people first. And so I wasn't there. I can't prove that it happened. There's so many ways. There's people now who, that never happened, even though that's not the historical consensus. I can't prove otherwise. But I can say, just like, people who are fans of Harry Potter or Star Wars, they know that it's fictional and they don't care because they love it so much. They love inhabiting that world. And that's the world that I love to inhabit. I love to inhabit a world where God cares about us, so much so that he's willing to suffer, right? Seeing his son die and be tortured in order to set the example of what it is to live a nonviolent, kind, and loving life. So, like I said, I can't prove that it's true, but I choose to believe it. So it's allowing myself to be biased, but be biased in a way that I want to be. And that's what I hope for you. You don't even have to accept the story of Jesus. I want the stories that you accept to be the stories that you want to accept, that you truly want to accept, not because they've been forced upon you or you've been coerced into believing them or under threat of violence you had to believe them. None of that, right? I want you to believe what you want to believe and to be free to examine all the possibilities. So that's the part of my story that I wanted to share at this time. And I hope that it has an effect on you so that you're able to be free and believe truly what you want to believe. Until next time, may you know love, may you have peace, and may the truth set you free.